People think we don't see what they write, we see, and sometimes it's not very nice.
What if the biggest moment of your career happened only after the world had already decided you weren't good enough? Keely Hodgkinson knows exactly what that feels like. For years, she was the runner who seemed destined to finish second. Olympic silver at 19, another silver at the World Championships, then another, close enough to touch the biggest prize in the sport but never quite able to take it. And yet, that isn't where her story begins. The real story starts much earlier, in Atherton, a working-class town in northern England that most people outside the area would never think of as the birthplace of an Olympic champion. There were no glamorous training facilities, no famous sporting dynasty waiting to hand her a path to greatness. Just Keely, her family, and a father named Dean who drove a taxi. And when his daughter started showing something different, he didn't know where it would lead. He simply drove weekend after weekend. Dean spent hours behind the wheel, taking Keely across northern England so she could compete in athletics meets most people had never heard of. Entry fees, travel, equipment, long drives home. There was no guarantee any of it would become a career. But he kept showing up, and then people started noticing the girl he was driving all those miles to support. At her local athletics club, Keely wasn't just good. She was noticeably faster than the athletes around her. By 16, she was winning national youth championships. By 17, she was competing at the European level. Suddenly, the little girl from Atherton wasn't chasing everyone anymore. Everyone was chasing her. But talent is easy to admire when you're young. The real test comes when the stadium gets bigger, the pressure gets heavier, and winning actually matters. At the biggest stage of her life, Keely discovered something painful. Being fast wasn't always enough, and the question that followed her for years was brutally simple. Was she actually good enough to win when it mattered most? Second place hurts differently when everyone already knows you're good enough to win. Keely had reached the Olympic final at just 19 and walked away with silver. Then came another major championship, another silver, and then another 3 major finals. 3 times she came close. 3 times someone else stood on the top step while Keely watched. From the outside, silver medals looked like success. Inside, they started to feel like a question. Maybe she was missing something. Maybe she could run fast when the pressure was low. But when everything was on the line, someone else would always find another gear, and Keely heard it. Then, just as she was finally proving those doubts wrong, she lost someone who had believed in her long before the world did. Joe Galvin had coached Keely since she was a little girl. He wasn't a celebrity coach. He didn't have the spotlight. He was simply the man at her local club who looked at a 10-year-old girl and believed she could become something special. In February 2023, 5 days before a major race, Joe died. Keely raced anyway. She won gold, but the tears on that podium said more than the medal ever could. She wasn't just running for herself anymore, and then came Paris. The silver medal curse finally disappeared. Keely became Olympic champion. She won race after race. For a moment, everything looked perfect. Then her body stopped cooperating. A serious hamstring injury forced her away from competition. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And eventually, more than a year passed without seeing the Olympic champion on a starting line. No races, no certainty, just rehabilitation, pain, and the terrifying question every injured athlete eventually has to face. What if I never become the same again? But Keely wasn't trying to become the same. She was rebuilding. New strength, new training, a new body, a new mindset. Keely called it Keely 2.0, and after 376 days away, one question remained: could the athlete who came back still be the champion who left? The answer was about to come in her very first serious race back. After 376 days away, Keely Hodgkinson finally stood on a starting line again. And for once, nobody was asking whether she would win. They were asking something much more basic. Was she still the same athlete? There was no guarantee. No easy comeback story, just Keely, the gun, 800 meters, and a year of doubt sitting somewhere in the back of her mind. Then the race started. She didn't look like someone who had spent more than a year fighting to get her body back. She looked like someone who had spent that year building something new. And when the final meters came, the clock delivered the answer nobody was ready for: 1:54.87, a world record. Not a personal best. Not simply a winning time. A world record, but then came the detail that made the moment almost impossible to believe. The record she had just broken had been set on March 3, 2002. The exact day Keely Hodgkinson was born. Think about that. That record had existed before she ever took her first breath. It survived her childhood. It survived every race, every silver medal, every doubt, every question about whether she could win when it mattered. It was still there while she spent 376 days away from the sport, wondering whether her own body would ever let her return. And then she came back and erased it. The record had been waiting for her since day one. That wasn't just a comeback. That was a full circle moment. And Keely didn't describe 2026 with words like relief or survival. She called it one word: domination. because she didn't come back just to prove she could still run. She came back better. And now the story gets even more interesting because one world record has already fallen, but the outdoor 800-meter world record has survived for more than 4 decades. Keely is already getting dangerously close. If she stays healthy, keeps improving, and reaches Los Angeles 2028 at her absolute peak, that record may finally have a problem. So here's the question, is Keely Hodgkinson simply back, or are we watching the beginning of the greatest 800-meter era of her career? Maybe the greatest lesson from Keely Hodgkinson isn't about running fast. It's about what you do when life forces you to stop. Your starting point doesn't decide your destination. Your failures don't define you. And sometimes, you don't need to become the person you were before, you need to become someone stronger. The world sees the record. It doesn't see the lonely days, the doubt, the pain, or the work done in silence. So remember this, you're not finished just because you've been knocked down. Maybe the real question isn't how fast you can run, but how many times you're willing to rebuild yourself before the world finally sees what you're capable of. If Keely's story inspired you, subscribe and stay with us for the next story. And tell me, what record do you think she breaks next?